President Muhammadu Buhari will dissolve the current federal cabinet on May 22 after presiding over a valedictory federal executive council. Well, how well have the ministers fared so far? And also tonight, the recent allegations of academicians using ad hoc staff to compromise the integrity of the just concluded 2019 polls by Professor Jega. Is this a cause for concern? This is Plus Politics tonight, and I'm David Alabi. Now, in less than a few weeks, President Muhammadu Buhari will be dissolving the current federal cabinet. How well have the ministers fared so far? Because the success of the ministers is the success of the president and, in turn, the entire nation. Joining me now in our Lagos studio, we have Ambrose Boke, a political affairs analyst. Thank you very much for joining us. And we also have Steve Agiode, the Rules and Ethics Director of the Accountability, Candor and Transparency Network. Good evening, gentlemen. Thank you. One of the biggest stories so far is whether or not the cabinet will be dissolved. But if going by all of the reports we've had so far, by May 22nd, we would have the cabinet dissolved. But let's start from the preceding elements. The start of the constitution of the ministers. 6 months down the line before the president decided to take action. Do you think he might likely make that same mistake again, saying looking out for persons with integrity and consolidate on the efforts so far made? Your thoughts?
Well, I don't know whether there's any efforts being made so far, because the last 4 years has been it has been moribund. We have not moved forward. We have rather gone backwards. We lost 6 months dilly-dallying, no cabinet. And then they came in, they brought up, without the 6 months to throw up some new paradigms, some new faces. But what we saw was recycled old faces. And then it's so unfortunate that there are no super ministers. Unlike before, when you, at least you'll be able to mention ministers. But now, the ministers are just maybe around 3 or 4. You hear their names out of almost 40-something ministers. And then the amalgamation of the ministries by the current government, it befalls me. Because, for example, the ministers were critical ministries that were merged into one and given to one man to run was the 8th or 9th wonder of the world. Because how can you, the critical areas where we have deficits, where we have infrastructural deficits.
Are you talking about power works and housing?
We're talking about works, we're talking about housing. These are critical areas where we have massive deficit. Yet you had the temerity to merge these critical ministries and give it to one, and made it one ministry and give it to one minister to run. And then you left other less important ministries to run on their own. So I think, first of all, they didn't get it right. As I always maintain, this government had no clear-cut policies that I know of. No clear-cut.
Unimpressed. Totally.
I'm totally unimpressed. And then you left them 4 years down the line. Many of the ministers are not performing. And then we thought we'd have a rejig of the cabinet after 2 years. Nothing happened, even those who were not functioning. And then there was all kinds of backwardness in the sectors. And then we left them till the 4 year running. And even at the expiration of 4 years, we are still talking about whether they will be dissolved or not. It's a shame of a nation, actually.
Steve, did you expect we would have seen some reshuffling, putting round pegs and round holes, having taken the 4 year time space, and between that area we should have seen and done assessments after the first year, second year, third year, and say, well, you're not functioning so well, and then that's why you have to be moved?
There's no doubt at all that there are some ministers that have not pulled their weight. I mean, there are some that even have a cartoonish orientation, like the sports minister. We know the sports minister is the minister for youth and sports, but he appears more like the minister for juveniles because of the way he dresses, the way he carries himself, and obviously has made no impact on sports. Then you go on to people like the health minister. The health ministry is in virtual shambles. The state of public hospitals I mean, they are all in a sorry state. So there are ministers that ought to in fact, one of the failings of this administration is that it ran for 4 years without a rejig of ministers. I think that was a tragedy. I think it ought to have been obvious to the president that some ministers weren't pulling their weight. As for my good friend, Babatunde Fashola, the Minister of Power and Housing,
You forgot the works.
Okay, gentlemen, we're still going to go into all of those details. But now, President Muhammadu Buhari has said that he's going to do better this time around, consolidate on all of his efforts, whether or not you think there was any effort being made. But he says that this time around, we wouldn't have any delays. And we've had different calls from different quarters, from both the ruling as well as opposition, that the president's constitution of his cabinet has to be right on time, because any delay would mean a slow implementation of the efforts or the blueprints that is supposed to be followed. But really now, though, to what extent do you think the president would have taken cues from what happened last? Because he too has come out to say that, well, he noticed that there were some ministers that weren't working, and that is why we would have some changes here and there. So we're taking him on a clean slate. Do you think he deserves that chance?
I think one of the personal weakness of President Buhari is his penchant to not be comfortable with doing away with loyal people. Whether they are efficient or not. For him, loyalty comes first, not efficiency, from what I've seen from his body language. So even if you are loyal and you're not working, there's this tendency to leave the people, even though they are not loyal.
Political leaning is not a requirement here.
So, but that is what we are seeing. I mean, that is what we are seeing. That is the trend. And one of the failures of this government was also the inability to constitute boards of the parastatals. Till today, they have not been constituted. They're just cherry picking. And so the attempt they made in 2017 December to bring out some names that constituted the board. There were names of dead people flying over in the list. And so they withdrew that list. And so how were the ministers functioning? So that means the ministers were approving budgets beyond their constitutionally required capacity, because some boards the board is supposed to sit to approve some contracts, to approve some, and these things were being approved without the board. So it is a sorry state. It's really a sorry state.
Steve, do you think that we should have? There are so many people who have called for us to have more technocrats than rather politicians here.
Well, I think the basic problem is. We have a need to represent the federal structure in setting up a cabinet. That means that combined with the fact that well, we are a political party, and let's be real here. Real politics means you will definitely, anywhere in the world, bring people from your own party. So the combination of two things, having to have one person from each state as a minister, and then having to have them from your political party was bound to create problems for any government. I think it's something we should look again at. The idea that we must have, say, 36 ministers, and that we must also have them coming from your political party. I think we should rethink it. The American cabinet is not more than 12. You get my point? These are things we should think about. Do we need a large and unwieldy cabinet with you paying so many, 36 people? Do you really need that? We also need to think of my cabinet. Do they only have to come from my political party?
Okay, before you move on, now, Ambrose as well, let's have your thought. Now, some have also said that, well, the president's appointment or the choice of the cabinet members is always lopsided, and people have said they've raised concerns over that. But now again, the president has said, in response to all of this back and forth with the National Assembly, he says that he wants to work this time around with people who are loyal to the vision of the party, who are ready to take the country to the next level. So do you still think we'll see that lopsidedness play out again?
Yeah, we'll see it again. Because as I've said, the president has just reiterated what I earlier said, that first of all, for him is loyalty. Loyalty over competence.
No, he says to push the dream forward. So people he believes are capable.
Well, the people with him, he also believed they would push the dream forward. And what we have was loyalty, parochial interests against efficiency, period. And what we see is that they constitutionally required to pick ministers from each of the 36 states. But also, most of the appointments he made, he was accused of having his own parochial interest, nepotic interest more. When you go to the security architecture, the security apparatus, most of the heads are from the north. When you go to critical appointments that he made, that he was not constitutionally required to pick from different states, I am sure that if the constitution did not mandate him to pick from different states, probably would have had maybe 90% of the ministers from one side of the country. And so that is the problem. The problem is that Nigerians are blessed with human resources from every nook and cranny of the country. So be it within any state, you can get technocrats that can run any government from any state. Then when it comes to party, I mean, Obasanjo did it. That he even had to give people like Edwin, the late Edwin Mozoke, he gave him minister, went from the NPP. There was a time he gave people, Obalaige was not in the party when he made him the minister for power. He was not in the party. He was an AD person then.
Exactly.
So if Obasanjo would have done that, then anybody could do it. So it doesn't mean that you must. Truth to the president, when he won, he said he will run an inclusive government. Exactly. So what it means by inclusive government remains to be seen. So it is when he constitutes his new cabinet, we will actually see whether all this talk was washed.
Whether or not the talk was washed. Now, the president also asked for a comprehensive status report on all of the project policies and programs that have been implemented by the cabinet members from their respective ministries, departments and agencies. And just yesterday was the deadline. We are not privy to the reports that were made, but I think that should give the president an assessment, a fair enough assessment, whether or not they've ticked the right boxes. But now let's take a focus at three different areas. We'll be looking at agriculture, health, labor, as well as power works and housing. Now, these ministers, let's start with health. Professor Isaac Adewale, and coming into this form of being the Minister of Health, we still see that universal health care is similarly not present, out of pocket still relatively high. We are still seeing dilapidated states of primary health care and secondary, tertiary health care facilities in the country. We have this huge brain drain, medical practitioners leaving the country. We've not seen any increase in budgetary allocation going to health. Some have said that we should have no less than 15% of our budget allocation going to health. But on the average,